Hey, it's Lindsay. CityCast Boise is doing our annual listener survey. It just takes a few minutes, 7 to be exact. We timed it. Head over to citycast.fm/survey. Plus, once you take it, you'll be eligible to win a $250 Visa gift card and CityCast swag. That's citycast.fm/survey. Today on CityCast Boise. Student directories may seem harmless, but federal immigration agents have begun using them to target students for welfare checks in the Treasure Valley, which is causing concerns and raising questions about whether schools can truly be safe for all students. It's Monday, August 18th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. I'm speaking with Rachel Spacek, a reporter with Investigate West, to find out more about these welfare checks on Idaho migrant students. Thank you so much for being here today, Rachel.
Hi, Lindsay. Thanks for having me.
So, what does the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, moving forward, claim that these welfare checks are for?
Yes, so these kind of started across the country in last spring, and it's been DHS agents are reaching out in some form or another to schools to say that they're checking on the welfare of unaccompanied minor children. So for people who don't know, those are people who have entered the country and came without their parent or guardian under 18, so either alone or, with a more distant relative, and they kind of go through a government process and they're settled with sponsors wherever kind of the sponsor lives. And so DHS has been reaching out to schools saying, we need to check on the welfare of these kids. And yeah, in Idaho, that's kind of happened in the form of emails to a couple of school districts.
And when you were investigating this story, did that hold up? Are they truly only looking at these unaccompanied minors, or was that accurate?
So national reports have found that in cases where DHS has conducted these wellness checks, they do appear to be a way that immigration agents are able to pick up some undocumented people who live in the same houses as these unaccompanied migrant children, or have often resulted in the children being taken back into government custody. And it's important to say that DHS historically, before the latest Trump administration, has never, ever checked on the welfare of these children. It's always kind of been under the purview of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is a separate government entity. And DHS does immigration enforcement. That's its primary responsibility. So the fact that they're saying that they're checking on the welfare of these kids while no one in DHS historically has any experience as social workers or, anything that would allow them to understand how to check on the welfare of these kids. So advocates are saying, and national reporting is saying, that these are kind of a cloud in which DHS is kind of trying to keep tabs on undocumented children and their families.
So this is kind of a new thing. It sounds like this wasn't policy or procedure until very recently. And you mentioned that they don't typically historically do this. So do these agents conducting these quote unquote welfare checks, do they have training in child welfare or trauma-informed care or cultural sensitivity?
Well, DHS has not responded to my question specifically about that, or any other national immigration reporters' questions about that. But historically, no. DHS is just kind of the entity that has immigration enforcement agents who don't have experience with kind of trauma-informed calls or experience with children and families like this. So it is a bit unusual that they're doing these wellness checks.
And so since it's new and kind of unusual, and maybe it seems like a step into, it sounds like, examine everyone living in the home or be able to target other people. And especially with schools starting up in a lot of districts around the Treasure Valley, have any of the school districts responded with formal procedures that they have in place for handling inquiries from Department of Homeland Security or ICE or other federal agencies about students?
Yes. So I talked to the superintendent and a couple school board members of the Caldwell School District. And they have a policy that they won't respond to questions, like won't let agents into schools unless they have a signed warrant, which in these cases of wellness checks, the ICE agents don't have warrants, so they would not be allowed in the school. And the Caldwell School District would not share any information about these kids. And the other district, kind of at the center of this story, is the Valley View School District. And they had an incident where the school resource officer did confirm student addresses of some of these kids with ICE agents. So no formal policy there not to share, obviously, because they did share it.
Yeah, I definitely want to jump into that because this is kind of a tale of two school districts in your reporting, where the Caldwell School District refused to share student information without a warrant, while Valley View School District provided it. Which approach aligns with best practice or the law?
Yeah, so there is a federal student privacy law called FERPA that protects student information, except what's called directory information. And so that is a student name, address, grade level, where they go to school. And that can be shared without informing like parents and getting consent. And so the big thing here is that schools can share directory information, but they don't have to. And that's kind of where these two approaches differ. Caldwell decided this is, such a scary thing. Our families are concerned about immigration enforcement regardless. We're not going to share any information. Like, that's our policy. And Valley View, shared directory information, which was legal, but could be seen as questionable by some of the advocates I talked to in this story.
And while you were gathering information and reporting on this, talking to advocates, what did you learn about what kind of message it sends to migrant or mixed status families when school officials are sharing this directory information that can be addresses and student information with federal immigration authorities?
Yeah, I think when I talked to advocates and specifically Marisela Piscina, she's a school board member for the Caldwell School District, she says that mixed status families and immigrant families are already very scared to seek any type of government services, scared to go to the doctor, sometimes scared to go to work or leave their houses. And so, with that fear already existing, hearing that a school is possibly cooperating with an immigration agent is really scary for people because, I think we see schools as a safe space and a place where, kids will be protected and can just go to school. And, she's really concerned that this sends a message that, schools aren't safe.
Well, and prior to the Trump administration, there were these safe areas, churches, hospitals, schools, where these kind of investigations weren't happening. This kind of information was not being given out. So what risks do these visits pose to the children that are going to these schools and their families? Maybe both immediately, arrest, detention, fears about their family being investigated, and also in the long term.
Yeah, I think it just leads to a lot of mistrust. And I talked to some national organizations that work with specifically kids who immigrate to the country without their parents and are settled with sponsors. And oftentimes those kids go on and live full, complete lives in the US. And if they're missing school or are scared to go to school or talk to people at school, that just like follows you and just kind of makes you really fearful of schools, which is not something that, advocates or teachers or anyone who works at schools want kids to feel. You're supposed to be able to feel safe at school regardless of who you are.
Need a reset or just a chance to slow down? Trade the traffic and to-do lists for a glass of wine and an open sky at Walla Walla. Just a scenic 4-hour drive from Boise, this peaceful destination in the heart of the Pacific Northwest offers a true escape from your hectic schedule. You'll have the opportunity to wander through more than 130 wineries nestled among golden hills and vineyards, and then cozy up in a tasting room. You can stroll through the charming historic downtown by day, and at night, dine al fresco on meals made by celebrated chefs from fresh ingredients grown just down the road on local farms. Come discover why Walla Walla is one of the Pacific Northwest's best-kept secrets. You don't have to go far to feel far away. Plan your getaway at wallawalla.org today. In your article, Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, clearly stated that these visits are meant to ensure that unaccompanied children aren't being exploited. In all of your investigating, do you really believe that's the true purpose of these investigations?
It's hard for me to say, what I think. I can just say what my reporting shows and what others have reported about these visits. I think they are very politically charged. Even in the statement that DHS gave me, they said kids were allowed to come into this country and settled with sponsors who might be exploiting them because of the last political administration. So it's a very politically charged thing. And I think reporting shows that the result of many of these checks are that family members are being picked up and placed in deportation proceedings, or kids are being placed back into government custody. So I think it's really hard to say. And also, statistically, lots of unaccompanied minor kids are settled with a sponsor that is related to them. And so that's kind of where advocates say that maybe the exploitation or the worry that these kids are being exploited is overblown a little bit, because they're often settled with family members and people close to them who hopefully wouldn't be exploiting them. So it's really hard to say. I think the reporting shows that many of the results of these welfare checks are immigration enforcement related.
And speaking of the recent political climate, in Idaho, our governor had an executive order that encouraged full cooperation with ICE. How is that shaping what happens in our schools?
Yeah, I think schools, especially the Caldwell School District, who I talked to, is being really careful with this. But I think when it comes to school resource officers, which is who was involved in this DHS outreach in this case, it also falls on the police department. And I think police, under the governor's executive order, police departments are being encouraged to work with ICE. So, I think if you are a police officer and you have been encouraged to work with ICE and you get this email, you might be more inclined to cooperate with them because of the messaging than not. And that's what people who I interviewed for this story are saying too. I interviewed Travis Manning, who is also a Caldwell School Board member, and he believes that the governor's message that, Idaho and our law enforcement agencies are going to fully cooperate with immigration agents. I think he said that sends a message that you should be cooperating to the fullest extent possible.
And Rachel, you spoke with different school board members, different advocates. Is there any kind of oversight that exists to ensure that these school resource officers, which is a different role than just your standard police officer, that they're following district policy rather than responding solely as a police officer?
Yeah, so they are supposed to be following both police department policy and school policy. And in this case, it is super squishy because, like I said, school districts in Idaho allow you to share directory information, which is what the school resource officer shared. So I think there was just in Caldwell an extra level of oversight. You know, the security person in Caldwell, once they got these emails, brought it to the superintendent. And that's when the superintendent reached out to legal counsel and said, okay, we're not sharing anything. And Valley View, to my knowledge, and public records requests did not follow that same procedure. So yeah, it kind of depends on the district.
That's what it sounds like. It seems like district to district, how this is implemented could vary wildly.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's something that school districts are, if they haven't already, are kind of going to have to reckon with or decide how they're going to do this, because I don't think, under the current presidential administration, this is going to change. Like, I'm sure these wellness checks aren't going to stop. I don't see any evidence for them stopping. So I think it's kind of something that school districts are going to have to figure out.
Rachel, from all of your investigating, from looking at this, what are potentially some steps that we as parents in various school districts or community members could take to make sure that our schools remain places where immigrant and migrant students can feel safe to learn?
Yeah, I think talking to advocates and school board members on the Caldwell School Board, they've just really tried to send a message to families saying, the school district doesn't collect any type of immigration information, so they don't know who is undocumented and who is, and so they can't share that information. Caldwell has a policy that they won't share information when ICE checks in. And so I think just, making sure that there is a policy if this happens again, and just encouraging people to say, schools won't be the ones to share information.
Was there anything that stood out in your reporting or in your investigation that didn't actually make it into the report, but that people should know about or you found interesting about this story?
I think what is interesting about this that I'm not sure quite, I was quite able to articulate in this story is in other places, like Los Angeles, for example, ICE agents have actually gone to schools to try to interview unaccompanied minor kids. And were turned away by the superintendent of the Los Angeles school district. And this is the first that I've heard so far. And so if any listeners hear differently or read differently, but this is the first time that I've heard that they've been emailing school resource officers specifically. And Travis Manning, who I mentioned earlier, kind of felt like this was a go-around type of thing to, skirt actual school district personnel and reach directly out to school resource officers. So I just kind of think that was an interesting piece of this, is they, reached out directly to SROs and not, the superintendent or principals at schools or things like that.
Well, Rachel, thank you so much. I really appreciate all the work you did looking into this story and for taking the time to break it down with me.
Thanks for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure and tell your friends about the show. We'll be back tomorrow morning with a look at how many OBGYNs have really left the state since the abortion bans went into effect. You won't want to miss it.